Daystar has been privileged to come alongside Arise for several years as they create a global alliance for the benefit of Israel's security and economy. Here to share more on how they are empowering leaders and ministries to conquer these challenges is the CEO of Arise, Simone Myers. Welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to see you.
Hello, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So Arise started in what year? And tell us how you had the vision. I know that you partnered with your brother as well, but how did it come about initially?
Yeah, so Arise, Kalev and I co-founded Arise in 2017. Specifically, at the time, our primary emphasis was to combat the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, which sought to delegitimize and discredit and disenfranchise and divest from Israeli companies, technology, innovation, all of the goodness that Israel brings to the world. And so to that end, you can't boycott the boycotters. So we did proactive economic development on behalf of Israel and Israeli companies, connecting that technology innovation and all of that goodness to the rest of the globe.
Including, I remember one year, Rebecca, you might remember better than me, but Rebecca and I attended one of the Arise summits where there was a gathering of Israeli entrepreneurs who were sharing their businesses with outside investors coming to invest into the nation of Israel. Is that summit still going on? I mean, obviously things have been tumultuous over the last few years, but that was a powerful moment.
Yeah, so we hosted two of those economic summits, physical economic summits in Israel, where we had over 500 business people from the global community, representing over 40 different countries at each conference, and able to facilitate tens and actually at this point hundreds of millions of transactional business. Shortly after that, COVID changed the entire planet and made it so that people really could not travel to Israel for quite some time. So we moved to more digital platforms and doing digital connectivity, and we still engage in that heavily. You know, since October 7th, everything changed, and our focus sort of changed and pivoted as well with that.
One of the components of Arise that I think is so valuable and resonates so deeply with me is the digital output that you guys are doing, because you know, Rebecca, you share with me sometimes you're on TikTok, and seeing Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson who have gone completely off the rails with Israel and the realities of Israel in the Middle East and the realities of how America should relate to Israel in the Middle East. And it's so important that we combat those. Combat might not even be the right word. Maybe educate those that are on these platforms, because these are voices that historically could have been trusted in the conservative movement, and now they seem totally to have lost their footing and their grounding, not only in the Bible, but just from the reality of what's going on there. Why do you think these leading thought leaders, such as, let's just take those two as an example, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, these people that historically have been accurate on their perspectives, have been so distorted and so twisted in the most recent times?
Yeah, I think in order to understand that, you kind of have to zoom out a little bit and understand the greater picture, that there is a war of decades going on, an information war, and a battle, a clash of civilizations, and a warfare is being waged against Judeo-Christian values, Western civilization as we know it. With regard to those two specific personalities and individuals, you know, there's a lot of conjecture regarding why they've sort of headed down this pathway, whether it's for financial gain. There's no question that it's for virality. If you follow the career trajectory of many of these people that have come out now as being outspoken against Israel, the state of Israel, they often started in linear mainstream media. And in the case of both of these two individuals, that was where they started. And then they moved out into opening their own platforms. And it's all a game of clicks, likes, follows, and that virality that they're seeking. And they have found a topic that gets them there, unfortunately. And the way that they're portraying it, you know, if you want to grow your likes and follows in today's world, unfortunately, just start speaking out against Israel.
Speaking of people doing that, we're also seeing in tandem not only this digital voicing anti-Israel rhetoric, but really tangible, in-person, face-to-face anti-Semitism that is growing not just in Europe, but right here in America. Is this just an example of the times that we're living in, or is there something fueling that that's ramping it up for something more intense to come? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, it's both.
Yeah.
And I think it is important to understand that this is a deliberate effort by a very unique and unusual alliance between socialism and Islamism and even extreme progressivism that now has slipped into the far right Christian nationalism as we're seeing. And it is absolutely deliberate. It's scary. If you want to know what you would have done in 1930s Germany, really it's what you're doing today and right now. And Arise is really deeply engaged in this battle for public opinion. It is the eighth front. Barry, a good longtime friend, was just here. And actually, interestingly, Barry and Batya are the first people that I stayed with in 1992,
Wow.
over 30 years ago,
Look at that.
when I went to visit Israel before my family moved there. So they're longtime friends doing amazing work. But Arise is deeply engaged in the battle for public opinion, and we are 2 decades, 20 years plus at this point, behind an enemy that is better resourced than we are, more organized than we are, and more motivated than we are. And we've got to wake up. Those that share our value system, Judeo-Christian values, freedom, Western civilization, we need to wake up, and a huge thank you to you here at Daystar for sharing the truth of what's really happening. It's very hard to find it in mainstream media anymore. So thank you guys so much for really taking up this cause and supporting us in so many of our initiatives, including what we did on behalf of the hostages with you guys. That was,
What's amazing is, well, thank you for saying that, but we have such an incredible audience that has an understanding, or they're talking to the Lord and the Lord is giving them that, not only in America, but in Canada and around the world, that will call in and want to sow specifically into Israel. Isn't that right, Rebecca?
I know. I'm just so grateful for you, our Daystar viewers and partners, because they are really what has made this possible. And even before my dad, when he was, before he passed and he was in his hospital bed, one of the things he reiterated to us was, he said, I think it was the most important one out of the 5, was that he says we need to be even better friend to Israel. And so, there is that vision and mission here. And I would have never anticipated for the attitude. He always would tell me that this kind of stuff would happen, but I never anticipated such a strong shift against Israel in this time, especially in even Christian communities. It's very disheartening because for me as a believer, I feel like it's very clear in Scripture what God says about Israel, how God's not finished with Israel, that God has a plan for Israel and how important that plan is. And yet a lot of Christians and different denominations even are really embracing replacement theology, but they call it covenant theology. Can you speak to that?
I can speak to it. I'm not an expert on these topics in terms of theology. I will say this. I think one of the things that I'd like to double down, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much, not only to you all, but also to your audience. Thank you so much. It really means the world to us, and never before has your voice been more necessary than right now on behalf of Israel. I want to talk about the greater battle. So what's happening is there is this battle of theology in the church, of, as you said, replacement theology, supersessionism, and people are arguing it back and forth one way or the other. But what is inarguable is the shared value system. So whether you support Israel biblically or not, and I think you should, you should certainly be supporting Israel if you believe in democracy and freedom and women's rights and all of these things that we celebrate and benefit from here in the United States and the Western world. Israel is the only beacon of Western civilization as we know it in the midst of great darkness. It's the only liberal democracy in the Middle East that shares our value system. And so, one of my goals for people in the believing community, in the church community, yes, be biblically literate. Yes, understand, biblical Zionism, but also acclimate yourself to the political situation and the shared value that we have together as Jews and Christians and Israel and the United States and the Western world. Because if you really want to influence your friends and those in your circle, they need to understand that. They may argue with you on theology, but what about women's rights? What about freedom? What about just morality as we know it? And so many of these things that if you do an assessment of the countries that are surrounding Israel and the enemies of Israel, they are really enemies of our value system. And so, you know, it's very important that we understand that we're able to advocate on those grounds as well as the biblical.
I think part of the problem is I think people in the West don't really have a good understanding of the mentality behind Islam and the mentality in the Middle East. And so they're kind of they're seeing it through their Western lens, and they don't realize the threat and the ideology that's fueling this. And I think also because if you go online, and that's why what you're doing is so important, because we are in an information battle. If you go online, the narrative is that Israel is oppressive and it's oppressing Palestine, and they would say they are the immoral ones. What would your response to that be?
I would say it's complete disinformation and misinformation. It's incredibly unfortunate, and that's why we do what we do every single day. The way to overcome those lies and that darkness is with truth. And, you know, because of freedom of speech in the Western world and the advances of technology, for the first time in history, there are foreign and domestic actors that have access to the masses. They can speak directly. They can bypass you and speak directly to your children. And freedom of speech allows for that to happen. And so people have the people with nefarious agendas have the opportunity to proliferate and spread lies, and they have machines behind it that are extremely well funded. And you've got to go a few layers deep in order to understand what's really happening. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe that's helpful.
Yeah, what's funding it?
Well, there are, I don't know if I should name names here. Some of it is state-backed funding. The enemies of Israel, the enemies of the United States, you can fill in the blanks. So some of it is state-backed propaganda outlets. Some of it is even entities here in the United States. There's this movement of people, and if you look at the Free Palestine movement, it is an anti-American movement.
Yeah.
They aren't just burning Israeli flags, they're burning American flags on the streets of this country and across our halls of education, and we've got to stand up and do something about it.
That's right. They literally teach Israel is just the little Satan, but America is the great Satan. So we know that Israel is this last outpost for Western democracy, this last outpost, like you said, that's standing for freedom and providing humanitarian rights like no other nation in that region. And so it's wild that you see them taken through the ringer by the UN and these other voices, and why it's so important, this work that Arise does. Well, in a moment, I'm going to have Rebecca pray for all these people that have called in for themselves or for church leaders to have an understanding of God's heart for Israel. But before I do, where can people go to follow along with what Arise is doing?
The best place to go is ariseforisrael.com. From there, you can access our podcast, you can access our social media. We encourage you, please share. As you're coming across this information, please become vocal. Now is the time. I get the question so often, is it too late for America? You know, when you look at what's happened across Europe, it's scary. And so there's this question of, is it too late here in this country? And the answer is that depends on what you do today, the decisions that you make today. Will you get involved in this battle? So go to ariseforisrael.com and you can follow all of the trails, many trails of information from there.